From religion to wrestling, gumbo to grits, politics to poetry, and all things Southern in between, this is Take on the South. Produced by the Institute for Southern Studies and hosted by the College of Arts and Sciences at the University of South Carolina, Take on the South examines the highs and lows of the American South, examines the truths and fictions of the country's most distinctive region, and picks the brains of some of its most accomplished students. To understand the South, you need to take it on, and that's what we'll be doing. Join us as we take on the South. The United States is one of the most geographically mobile places in the world. People move. A lot. And those people include Southerners. What makes Southerners move? And importantly, why do they often choose to come back? Today we ponder the question of Southern roots broadly understood. Why do people leave and then return to the South, and what do they do upon returning? How and what do they import what they've learned by venturing elsewhere? What sorts of improvements do they bring to their place of birth? How do they restore their Southern roots? To help us through this topic, we have with us today James Williams, CEO of Food People Restaurant Group, FPRG. Their byline, it's not just the food, it's the people. Founded in 2004 by Chris Sully Sullivan, FPRG started with one Alpine deli and cafe in North Carolina and has grown to operate a diverse portfolio of fast casual and casual dining restaurants. Today they are based out of Columbia, South Carolina, with a geographic footprint that spans the Carolinas and Georgia. Brands you'll know if you're a local include Carolina Ale House, Taco Sushi, Crave, and Alpine Bagel. James, welcome to Take on the South.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure entirely. You're telling an interesting story, one that I think will appeal to lots of people who move, come back, some people who don't move, perhaps should. But before we get into what you do here, let's talk about your backstory a bit, your family history. Leaving the South, returning to the South. You're from here, right?
I'm from here. And so I think my story in a weird way started probably 45 years ago when my grandfather opened the very first Lizard's Thicket restaurant here in Columbia, South Carolina. And so that was sort of the opportunity for my dad, who was one of 7, and his siblings to start moving back to Columbia and getting involved in the family business. You know, I think in the restaurant business, it's a hard business. Everyone hears about the fail rate of restaurants, and
which is what? Do you know what it is?
The fail rate?
Yeah,
God, I don't know, 90%.
Is it really?
Oh my gosh,
Lord.
It's
there's a certain courage to undertake this, right?
Well, it's just incredibly high. I think that often people get into the business thinking it's going to be a hobby or a fun way to spend their years, but it's not. You know, it takes an incredible amount of hard work and dedication and know-how, and a little bit of luck. And so they had all 3 of them, apparently, and worked hard to build what is the Lizard's Thicket organization that anyone locally knows today.
It's a Southern institution. I mean, it's food, politics. I mean, it veins everything. You know, if you're running for office in South Carolina or nationally, you have to go to Lizard's Thicket, right?
That's right. It is a well-known stopping point for politicians.
Yeah. How many are there? Do you know?
We are, I believe we're at 14 right now.
14. That's statewide, right?
That's statewide. Most of them are around the Midlands, though. Yeah. They're building one currently out in the Lexington, sort of almost Red Bank area.
Okay.
And that'll be the first one they've built in quite a while, but excited to see it growing again.
So did you work there when you were growing up?
I did. We all did. I have 26 first cousins on the Williams side, and the vast majority of us grew up here. Went to Cardinal Newman High School, worked in the restaurants. You know, it was a good way to grow up. It's a good way, one, to have family around, 2, to, you know, be put to work and kind of learn the values of hard work.
Yeah. Did you do everything in the restaurant when you were growing up? Did you wait tables and cook, for example?
So I would say I did I never waited tables because those are the best jobs in the restaurant. So we couldn't get those. And I never was truly like a general manager who managed restaurants. Okay. Otherwise, I would say pretty much did everything in the restaurant.
So you've been on the cooking side as well, right? So you've actually cooked this stuff.
Oh yeah. You start off busting tables, then you start washing dishes, then you get to do a little little prep cook, and then you get to cook on the line, then you get to work the drive-through window.
So if I'm looking for the quintessential Southern experience in a way, it's that, right? I mean, Lizard Sicket, working in a Southern restaurant, Southern cuisine, right?
Oh, yeah.
And it's teaching you about family values and hard work and ethics and what have you. So, all right, you grew up in the restaurant environment, and not just any restaurant. And then what did you do?
So after high school, I went to Washington and Lee University. So I started my journey north. I went up to Virginia. I wrestled at W&L. It was a really wonderful experience. Honestly, it was life-changing. Made the best friends of my life and started getting introduced to kind of the ideas of what we would do after school. And so most of my friends and most of the population in Washington and Lee migrated to either New York or D.C. after school. It was really heavily a finance-focused school.
Yep.
And so I took some of those classes. I wasn't convinced that was what I wanted to do after school. I didn't want to, I had this sort of idealized vision of investment banking and finance that scared me away from it a little bit. And so I actually... I started a small company over in Africa, in Nairobi, Kenya. We made clothes that we then brought back over here to the United States and sold. And so, the profits would go back over there. It was a for-profit entity, but the idea was very nonprofit in spirit.
So you did this while you were at Washington and Lee?
I did.
As a student?
I did. This led me to getting I got a fellowship from a group called the Princeton Alumni Fellows, and ended up working at a nonprofit, like a large federal contractor that was a nonprofit in Washington, D.C. The mission was to employ people with disabilities. And so I continued my journey north and ended up living right smack in the middle of Washington, D.C. for a couple of years.
Well, I never. So you're inching your way up north.
Inching my way up north.
Through Washington and Lee, which is a fabulous university.
I'm very lucky to be there.
Yeah. I like it a great deal. And you're really exposed to the world of finance at Washington and Lee, right? Okay.
Very much so.
And you end up in Washington after having already established a business, right?
Yeah.
And how long were you in Washington for?
So 2 years, and so I kind of did both while I was there. And so in Washington, D.C. is the home of the federal government, and the federal government seems to just push money out, right? And so everyone is trying to get as close to it as possible. And so really I was in this world of federal contracting and, a world of politics and a world where people ask you who you work for and where you live before they ask your name.
Yeah.
And to be totally honest, that was just the antithesis of what I had grown up with and what I was comfortable with. And so I started looking for ways to get out.
Gotcha. I understand. So let me sort of get this right. Lizard Sicket, quintessentially Southern, Washington and Lee. You'd probably describe that as a very Southern university, right?
For sure.
Okay. And then Washington, D.C., which... what I'm hearing here is not very Southern at all, right?
Not very Southern at all.
Yeah, okay. So you're sort of catapulted into this. And by the way, had you been to Nairobi? Did you toggle back and forth?
I had visited, I had done a study abroad in Spain, and I had cooked up this idea, booked a flight down there, met a number of people who worked in these slums as tailors, and got hooked up with Feed the Children, which is a large international nonprofit, and they actually, I struck up a partnership with them. And
so this is very interesting to me for lots of reasons. The principal one is, obviously, as an individual, you're motivated by certain things.
Yeah.
But you're also a product of your own past and place, right? And here you're doing something extraordinarily entrepreneurial at a very young age. Is there a Lizard Sicket connection to that? Because you're hungry, and more than that, plenty of people are hungry, but they don't act on the hunger, right? But were you given the tools not just to imagine this, but enact it?
Yeah, I think in more than one way. Selfishly, I always looked at my uncles and my father and my aunts, and they lived a life where they worked incredibly hard, but they answered to themselves at the end of the day. And so I think that in my mind, I had idealized this idea of being entrepreneurial, of owning whatever I was doing and whatever I was a part of. And so was sort of at a young age started scraping away at how to make that idea a reality.
Sure. I mean, one of the great myths about the South, of course, is that it isn't very entrepreneurial, right? Like, it's a kind of a backwater. And if you study the 19th century, that's certainly the kind of prevailing image, largely courtesy of northern visitors, right? It's always backwards to them. And yet, plainly, from my perspective anyway, and now listening to you even more so, there's always been this entrepreneurial kind of, imaginative embrace, not just of the market, but of the transatlantic world, right? I mean, the whole place was born in that context. And in a way, you're kind of reaffirming that entrepreneurialism and that cosmopolitanism, right?
I do think that there is an element of not necessarily being geographically situated right next to the greatest resources, right? You don't have some of the investment culture that you may have in California or in New York or in a place like DC or Dallas, right? And so, this continues to be one of our trials in terms of building that culture, because access to capital at the end of the day is the greatest challenge that any entrepreneur will face.
Well, let's talk about that. You're in Washington. You've kind of had enough after a couple of years.
Yep.
And is that when you begin your migration back to the South?
So, I in some ways went south, but I skipped the southern United States and went even further south and joined the Peace Corps and ended up in Costa Rica for a couple of years.
All right. So you did really skip the global South, right? So you're still in that same hemispheric atmosphere.
Yeah.
And then after Peace Corps in Costa Rica for a couple of years, where'd you go then?
So in the Peace Corps, I worked for a little microfinance bank. To be totally honest, continued this journey of access to capital for entrepreneurs. It was just in a very different setting. You learn a couple of things when you live in poverty. You learn that financial security is not something to be taken lightly or taken for granted. And you learn that if you ever want to have an impact on the world you live in at scale, you better find a way to access capital yourself. And so my way of doing that, I decided, was to go to business school and get my MBA. I knew at this point that I wanted to be back closer to home. And so Duke, I was lucky enough to get into, and it happened to be a great school and only a few hours from home. And so I got into Duke. So Duke is interesting. It is in the South,
right?
But it is not necessarily a Southern institution like some of its neighbors.
Right. What makes it less than Southern, in your opinion?
Well, it's students.
Yeah.
Demographics,
right?
People come from all over the world to go to that school.
Yeah.
It is obviously up there in high education, and it is let's just say it's not a place where it's the good old boys club of Southern hospitality. Right. You have a lot of people from the Northeast. You have a lot of people from that come internationally. And so, I kind of got back on this track of finance. To be honest, this was kind of where I got reinvigorated.
Gotcha.
I knew that this idea of access to capital was in the back of my mind. I needed to figure out how to do it, and so I quickly jumped on, the recruiting track of investment banking. And so in the summer between my first and second year, I actually went to New York on an internship with an investment bank. And so, culturally, I wouldn't say that it was where I was happiest or felt like I had fit in, but the biggest part of the story is that right before I left for the summer, I had come home to Colombia for a wedding, and I met who is now my wife. And so pretty quickly, I knew that I wasn't staying in New York.
Is she from the South?
She's from Colombia.
Okay, all right.
Oh, yeah.
There you go, another reason to come back, right?
That's right, that's right.
Let me just ask you, I'm just curious. So you're working in Manhattan, investment bank,
yep.
so financial capital of the world. Did anybody comment on your southernness while you were there? And I'm asking this because I interviewed Lou Kennedy about this, and she said, "Oh yeah," she said, "But I use it. Like I use my southernness as a way to disarm people, right? Charm them, but also disarm them." There's an assumption that you have a different accent from the South.
Yep.
You're a bit slower, but you can use that to your advantage, at least according to Lou. Did you have the same experience?
I would absolutely say, even at Duke in New York, that absolutely people underestimate you when they hear your accent come out, which I think she put it a very poignant way, that you use it to disarm people, right? Because you know that you're just as smart and just as well educated as anyone else in the room, but if they're going to underestimate you, well, that's just perfect. That just puts you in position, to surprise them.
Did you encounter that in New York? Did you leverage it?
Absolutely, absolutely. I don't know if I have like a good example to point to, but certainly when people first meet you, they might dismiss you, they might underestimate you, but then your work product proves itself. If you can do it the same as anyone else or better.
Sure. Yeah, I like this a lot. It's one of the kind of unspoken weapons that people have, right?
Yeah.
So there you are. You come back. You're wedding in Colombia. You meet who's going to become your wife. Yeah. It's almost inevitable that he returns, right? And you have every reason to be back here because your family, Liz Sickett, the things that you learned. You went outside of the South for a bit, honed those skills. Both in DC and abroad, and then return. So upon returning, what did you decide to do when you got back?
So my stop after business school, and this is a little bit of a dilemma with the South, right, is to get that degree, you feel like you have to put it to work, you have to make a certain salary, you have to do a certain type of job, and there aren't that many of them in the South, unfortunately. So I was lucky enough to find a position at a private equity firm in Raleigh that focusing actually specifically on restaurants around the country. So I was able to maintain, keep my feet in this high finance world, but be at least geographically closer to home so I could date who would become my wife for the most part.
So in Raleigh?
In Raleigh. And so got to travel, had to travel constantly, and so got to really explore the country on a professional level with that firm, and had a grueling but really wonderful and ultimately incredibly educating experience that gave me some of the tools that I have been able to bring home and have really gotten me to where I am now.
So let's talk about where you are now, right? So you do a lot of things. FPRG, what does it do exactly?
Yeah, so the story starts with that. I came home with this idea of wanting to buy a company and run it. That was sort of my entrepreneurship through acquisition strategy that I had all lined up in my head. Yeah. And I met a gentleman named Chris Sullivan, we call him Sully. And Sully already owned the 7 Carolina ale houses that are in South Carolina and Georgia, as well as Alpine Bagel, which has 2 units on campus at the University of North Carolina. And I had approached Chris and said, hey, I want to do this, and was working on convincing him. And he said, look, come run my existing company. So come manage the day-to-day with what's going on already. And if you find another company or another brand we can buy, we'll do it. We'll make it happen. So I did. Beginning of a very happy marriage. Started running the day-to-day and found Taco Sushi rather quickly through some of my investment banking contacts. Is based out of Augusta, and struck up a relationship with the owner. Long story short, negotiated the deal, got some bank financing in place with a local bank here, and we were able to acquire the company just a little bit over a year ago.
So when you say negotiate the deal, he sold it to you, and I'm guessing, how does it work, James, when you're looking for businesses that, I mean, because there's a million of them, how do you decide that it's going to be taco sushi?
Yeah.
Right? What is it? What are the metrics? I mean,
Well,
and how does it happen? Do you have, is it word of mouth? Is that what it is, or?
So so some of it is, so word of mouth is one way to say it, but some of that word of mouth is professionalized, right? So this is what investment bankers do. They're relationship bankers. They are trying to represent sellers and find them buyers for their company, or on the opposite, represent buyers and help them find companies to buy in order to fulfill their strategy.
Sure.
And so for me, it was a networking exercise, right? I had left this private equity firm, and I called all of my contacts, so all the investment banks, the business brokers, the commercial bankers, the industry folks, and just said, hey, I've left. This is what I'm doing. This is what I'm looking for. Do you know anything? For me, it was all about narrowing down one, geographic region, two, size of the company, three, industry, right? Okay. So I knew it was going to be restaurants. I knew it was going to be within 3 hours of Columbia, South Carolina.
Okay.
And I knew that we were, check size-wise, we weren't looking for a $50 million business. We were looking for a $5, $10, $15 million business.
Gotcha.
And so this one just happened. We looked at dozens and dozens of opportunities. This one just kind of nailed it. And from a, profitability standpoint, it was there. We felt like it had the bones to grow. We felt like we were buying it not at a discount, but on a relative basis to where we thought we could get it within 5 years, a discount. Yep. We thought we could really take it and grow it quickly. And not that we don't know what the future of taco sushi holds, right? We don't know but we would love to be in a position in 5 years to make a decision around, we keep it, we continue to grow it ourselves slowly and steadily. Do we bring in partners? Do we franchise it? Do you sell it? But we want to be in a position to make those decisions in 5 years. And so we felt like it was set up really nicely to get us there.
So when you're looking for these businesses, and you had your particular specs here, had to be near Columbia and what have you, do you find, is that fiercely competitive? In other words, were other people looking for taco sushi at the same time?
So this is interesting. So Taco Sushi had formally gone to market back in 2019. Okay. And they had a number of mid-sized private equity firms and other potential buyers who had bid on the company, and actually bid quite a lot more than we ended up bidding. But for whatever reason, the owner had not gotten along with them, hadn't trusted them with his baby, if you will. Yeah. And then in the middle of that process, they had a fire at one of their locations that burned it down. Okay. And so they kind of called it off, said, never mind, we're kind of going back. Just after they did that, COVID hits, right? So then this had kind of just been languishing for a couple of years. So it just so happened when I called these bankers, this was a quote-unquote off-market opportunity. So no one else was looking at it. Okay. No, there were no other opportunities for them to sell at the moment. They were sort of preparing to go back to market. And, it was a quirky older gentleman who had been in the business for a long time and was very particular about who bought his business.
Interesting.
And we were lucky enough to strike up a really great relationship that continues today. And so he felt like he trusted us.
I'm curious, is he Southern?
He is Southern.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just curious.
Yeah.
I mean, there's an emotional connection.
Yeah, for sure.
That kind of stuff matters, right?
Yeah, he's an Augusta guy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. So perhaps there was a dividend to being Southern in this. Who knows, right?
You're probably right.
So let me explore a little bit about how you see your business. And you've got this interesting sort of triptych of a mantra to what you do and for your restaurant group. So it's there's three things really that I took away from it. Teamwork means everything to us. Gotcha. We're rooted in integrity. Like it. But the one that attracted my attention is Carolina hospitality runs through our veins. We live and breathe Carolina hospitality. We build and nurture environments where everyone feels at home and welcome. Can we talk a little bit about Carolina hospitality and what does it mean and how is it different from other forms of hospitality in other places?
Yeah, it's funny you brought this up, and it's such a hard thing to bottle, right, or to explain. And it's funny because all I can think is you either get it or you don't.
Yeah.
And when we hire people, so often you can talk to them for 15 minutes and if they get it or if they don't. And the markers are, you hear the common ones. Well, they held the door for someone, but it's, do you offer someone a glass of water? Do you offer them a coffee? Are you more concerned with their comfort and their happiness than your own at any point in time? Right? So when I think of it through the eyes of a waitress or a server, it doesn't matter what's going on in your day. It doesn't matter how you feel. You put the guest, and your teammates, so everyone around you, if you're truly can put them before yourself and put your own feelings aside and be selfless, to me, that is the closest way for me to describe true Carolina hospitality.
Okay. That makes perfect sense to me. I'm just curious. Let's say you're in Illinois. I mean, is this an American conceit or is it a Southern one, right?
Oh, that's easy. It's Southern.
Okay, good.
It's easily now. Look, every region has the things that are great about them, right? You hear Midwestern values, right? You hear this Northeast work ethic, etc. Ours just happens to be genuine care and love and compassion for one another.
Yeah, I like that.
Even people we don't know.
Yeah, it's not Ed DeBevick's in Chicago, is it? Right, where they insult you by just being wretched. All right, interesting. And again, I find it to be very authentic and not artificial. It's not a performative thing. There's something that's there and it's real and it's true, and it is experiential. Like you can't really write it down. You have to just experience it, right?
That's right. That's right.
That's why we're probably the number one destination in the South. People come here for that reason, or among others.
That and the beaches.
And you combine the beaches and Carolina hospitality, and suddenly you have a little slice of paradise.
That's right.
Do you think you're a better entrepreneur, James, because you left the South and came back? Could you have done it by staying here?
For me personally, I had to leave. I had to go learn those things. I had to learn about finance. I had to learn about transactions. I had to see how it's done at the highest level so that when I came back, we could put it to work. I mean, like even our latest venture, you mentioned Crave earlier, and that's just me and my dad and my little brother, and an opportunity fell in our laps. A local guy, John Brunty, wanted to sell this really great little business that he had built. Again, he was particular about who he wanted to sell the business to. Built this relationship, but then in terms of structuring the deal, making sure we were able to buy it, bringing in some financing, etc., like negotiating this deal, that's a very small example, but still, it all felt so naturally and so easy to do because I had done it repetitively so many times in a place where that was common, right? And so to be able to do it here, it's a little bit more uncommon, but for us, it just feels natural.
Let's by way of a long conclusion, talk about the macro and the micro. First off, I'm interested in how you see this region. Columbia, South Carolina, you can define it. What does the future look like in your particular line of work? I mean, is it burgeoning, or obviously it's seasonal, the students are here, they're not here. But casting forward 10, 15 years from now, what does it look like to you at a state level or a city level?
So the hospitality industry in general, we have a lot of evolution to go through. I think so. There's a category that I call entertainment, right? So this is like a punch bowl social, or like we used to have Jillian's down in the Vista. These sort of places that combine activities.
Like axe throwing.
The axe throwing, exactly. I think that there is a ton of evolution to be had in that space. Okay. It's happening around the country. Some of it hasn't gotten here as much.
What's not here yet? What can we look forward to?
Up in Greenville, they've got like an indoor putt-putt. There's so much that's missing here in Columbia, and that is a huge part of what I hope to see continue to grow here.
You're right, because there's the axe throwing, and then there's the bowling.
Right, and then it's pretty much tops.
Is that it, right?
Pretty much tops out. I mean, we don't even have some of like the institutionalized large format like dog parks that people have in Atlanta or in Charlotte, right? So
I'm not actually familiar with those. So what is that?
Yeah, I think there's one called Fetch Atlanta.
Uh-huh.
It's like, look, they have a bar that's set up. You can go, you bring your dog, you drink, maybe it's like some small bites available, but there are so many opportunities to bring people together around activities that also then include food and drink.
Ingenious.
That we just don't have here. Obviously, as we evolve down towards the river, the opportunities are endless. Underutilized forever. We all know the story,
That's
et cetera,
true.
et cetera. But,
very true.
But we're all excited to see how that evolves. But that creates an enormous number of opportunities.
Yeah, interesting. Very interesting. What do we need to get there?
We need lots of good ideas and lots of people who are ready to work really hard.
What about state involvement? What can the state do to help it?
There's a lot that can be done at the state level from a funding perspective. But at the end of the day, I truly believe that, what will make it special and what will make it truly ours has to come from the entrepreneurs and from the individuals that are here in this town and really care and want to create something special. Because you can have all the money in the world, but if you haven't really thought it through, if you haven't really put your heart and soul into it, it's just going to be another McDonald's.
Yeah, that makes sense. So that's the macro. Micro, where are you headed? Where's your company headed?
Yeah, we've got 3 new taco sushis that are under construction. So that's all very exciting. One in Lexington on Main Street, one over in Forest Acres on Forest Drive, and then one up in Greenville, kind of out in the suburbs there. So that's all very exciting and keeping us very busy. We're trying to sign new leases. We'd like to open a few more next year.
Yeah.
And then we are actively looking to acquire other brands. Regionally specific. We want to stay kind of in our home base here, but we're trying to find new stuff.
Exciting. You must be very busy.
We're trying to be.
James Williams, thank you so much for joining us today and giving us real insight to the nature of Southern roots, the benefits of leaving, and the enduring credit of coming back.
Thank you so much for having me.
Our pleasure. That was our Take on the South. Let us know yours. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at U of SC South. Take on the South is produced by Matt Simmons of the Institute for Southern Studies. Special thanks to Professor Dave Garner of the University of South Carolina School of Music for composing our music. Tune in next time for another Take on the South.